Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome back to the Life Vision Lab podcast, the space where we explore what it truly means to live a clear, conscious, and purpose driven life. I want to begin today with a moment of gratitude for you, this growing community, and for the journey that's unfolding. We're now reaching listeners and subscribers from all around the world, and it honestly feels like divine orchestration. But I also want to be real with you. Getting here took a lot of inner work. There was a time when I only dreamed of having conversations like these, very deep, meaningful exchanges with people who inspire me at the soul level. And the truth is, I had to do a lot of personal alignment work to meet that vibration, to become the kind of person who could attract these experiences. If you've ever wondered how to raise your own vibration to attract the right opportunities, people, and purpose into your life, stay tuned. I'll be doing a special upcoming episode just on that, how to work on yourself from the inside out so what you desire can find its way to you. But for now, I'm so excited to dive into today's conversation, one that speaks directly to the power of curiosity, learning, and living with intention. Dr. Sheldon Greaves, I am so excited to have you on Life Vision Lab podcast. You are the author of the Guerrilla Scholar's Handbook. Dr. Sheldon has earned his PhD from US Berkeley while living and working in Silicon Valley during the dot-com boom, and somehow managed to pursue deep intellectual work while balancing the chaos of real life. He calls his approach Guerrilla Scholarship, a way of living and learning that refuses to fit inside the ivory tower. His book is part memoir, part how-to, part manifesto, and completely alive with the idea that curiosity itself can be an act of freedom. That is so powerful. Today, we'll explore what it means to live a life of the mind on your own terms. Dr. Sheldon, I am so excited to have you here. Take us back. Where did the idea of the Guerrilla Scholar
Thank
first
you,
begin?
Shwetha. It's a pleasure to be here. The idea of guerrilla scholarship for me really started in the early phases of my doctoral program when I was at Berkeley. There were a couple of things that contributed to it. One was, in addition to me working on my doctorate, we were newly married, and my spouse was working on her doctorate at Stanford University in classics. And so we were basically a young couple putting two kids through college, namely each other. We had to get creative because one of the problems that we faced, of course, was money. And one way that we dealt with that was that I would go to school and my wife would work, and then the next year we would swap, and she would go to school and I would work, and then we'd swap back again. It took longer, but we did both manage to finish and stay married, which I thought was pretty cool. The other problem, though, is that during the times when I was working, I didn't have access to the usual tools at the university. So in order to keep up with my studies, I had to get creative. I had to find other ways of accessing the same information or something comparable and to stay current on what was being published. That required some finesse and creativity. But a really big influence for me was a book by Ronald Gross called The Independent Scholar's Handbook, which I encountered in 1985 or 86, and it literally changed my life. He demonstrates in this book that not only is independent scholarship available to anyone who's willing to take a chance on it, there are certain advantages to being an independent over and above being in academia. And he also demonstrates that a lot of the really creative and innovative thinking in the intellectual world is not happening in academia. It's happening outside among independents, not quite so constrained by what you're allowed to do in the university. The other problem was that even though I had a career path kind of mapped out for when I finished, which was to stay in academia and teach, a couple of things happened. One was I discovered that there really weren't any jobs out there. And, what do you do with that? The other was that I discovered that they really were serious about staying in your lane as far as your specialty.
Mm.
So one of my professors, this absolutely wonderful woman, was a great teacher and a mentor for me and was the head of my dissertation
Mhm.
committee. She retired about the same time that I was finishing my dissertation, and she was all excited. And she made this really interesting comment. She says, now I can finally study, I can do research on the things I've always wanted to do. And that kind of set me back like, really? You couldn't do that when you were, because it wasn't like she was going to go off and, go from, she was an Assyriologist, and it's not like she was going to go off and study black holes or something like that. I mean, these were still things that were
Mhm.
nominally in her field.
In line with what she'd worked
Exactly.
on,
Yeah.
right?
Uh, but the thing was,
Mhm.
in academia, you can do research on stuff that you can get funding for. And getting funding is a
Mm.
big part of it. And if you can't get the funding for your particular project, it's not going to happen. Well, she had
Mhm.
retired. She had a pension now. She didn't have to go chasing after grant
Mhm.
money. She still had her office. She still had
Mhm.
access to the university library and her colleagues. So she was free to do pretty much whatever she wanted. And she actually ended up doing some
Mhm.
really cool stuff. So that, all
Mhm.
those things, it was Silicon Valley in the late 80s, early 90s. There was an incredible amount of really cool stuff going on. The computer revolution was happening. There was
Mhm.
all kinds of scientific and
Mhm.
technical um, advances
Mhm.
and revolutions that were going on. And I'd always been interested in science anyway. Um, it seemed wrong just to let all that go and just ignore all that for
Mhm.
the sake of
Mhm.
an academic convention of specializing. I didn't want to
Mhm.
do that. So
Mhm.
I decided to take this philosophy and take it on the road and see what happened. Did.
Amazing. And that's so empowering, even listening to you say that, Dr. Sheldon, because I know several people who probably want to pursue this, but really struggle thinking about financial constraints, family
Mm-hmm.
constraints, just focus so much on the constraints without really thinking, how can I actually pursue it? And so it's so empowering to know that you did it through all of these constraints yourself. And what did you say your PhD was or is in, Dr.
Yeah, my
Sheldon?
PhD is in ancient Near Eastern studies, which is geographically the
Wow.
Middle East, but
Mm-hmm.
the ancient world, Mesopotamia, Syro-Palestine. And I would say
Mm-hmm.
my primary area of specialty is the Hebrew Bible, or the Old Testament to most of us.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. And how long did you take to finish your
It took me
PhD?
11 years. Yeah,
Wow, but
we
you
kept
kept
at it.
at it. And so it was resilience, it was grit, it was having that vision
Mm-hmm.
ahead that you want to make sure you get your, and I think it was the hunger to learn.
Yeah.
I don't think it was a lot about getting the degree or the certification or the credentials, but I think it was just the hunger to learn that got you
Mm-hmm.
to achieve it. Beautiful. And at what point did you realize you were creating a completely new model for the intellectual
It
life?
sort of came on gradually
Mhm.
until the last couple of years in academia when I was having to think about, well, what am I going to do now when after I graduate?
Mhm.
When I graduated, what was I? I was like in my late 30s, and I realized I'd been basically in school since I was 6. And so
Mhm.
now what do I do now? And at first
Mhm.
I just worked as a technical writer because that's basically what humanities majors did in Silicon Valley after they graduated. But then I just kind of kept my eyes open and looked around for opportunities to explore other things. I got involved with a group called the Society for Amateur Scientists that ended up um, creating some really interesting projects and opportunities to play around with ideas. My wife and I were active
Mhm.
members of the local astronomical society. We spent a lot of
Mhm.
time out at the San Francisco Baylands. My wife is a very
Mhm.
skilled nature photographer,
Mhm.
and so we spent a lot of
Mhm.
time checking out the birds in the saltwater marshes around the Bay Area.
Mhm.
And all this just seemed perfectly natural because it was interesting and it was fun, and I wasn't constrained by grants or department conventions.
Because you could still live
Mm-hmm.
a life and continue learning without sacrificing one or
Mm-hmm.
the other. Yes, it took
Mm-hmm.
time, but who's going to put a clock on it when you're so passionate
Yeah,
about,
there are
right?
certain things you have to accept. For one thing, if you're going to take the guerrilla scholar route, you have to understand that things are going to take longer. It's going to take more time,
Hmm.
but
Mhm.
that's okay because that's half the fun. If the journey is the reward,
Mhm.
then sometimes it pays to journey a little more slowly and enjoy it. And
Yeah.
yeah, money is definitely an issue if you're doing something that requires that. But today we live in a world where information is everywhere. And the
Mhm.
ironic part is that there are vast reservoirs of information that most people have no idea even exists. Yeah.
Or even if they know it exists, I don't think we have the patience to pause and do deep dives into like
Mm-hmm.
what you did because we're so constrained by what's okay and what's
Mm-hmm.
not okay from an
Yeah.
academia
Yeah.
perspective, right?
The other problem
Um,
with being outside of academia is that you're somewhat more subject to bad information. Whether it's just plain old mistaken or it's
mm,
active disinformation. And I actually have an entire chapter in the book on dealing with disinformation.
mhm.
When I started, when I never thought I would end up having to write about that, but here we are. So,
But I think it's so important to talk about it in
mm-hmm,
this day and age of social media. So many different ways that we get
mm-hmm,
information. And so many of us feel we have to wait for perfect conditions before we begin. But what I hear you say is curiosity doesn't wait for
no,
permission, right? You have to pursue it. And there's so many ways you can do it. And I know your book talks a bit more
mm-hmm,
in detail. So let's dig into that
okay.
philosophy a bit more. How does a guerrilla scholar think differently from someone following a traditional academic path? What are the core principles, the mindset of the guerrilla
Well,
scholarship?
the first step is to understand that you can go anywhere. You can follow
Mhm,
whatever path the information and the evidence takes you, and you can follow your interests.
mhm,
For example, back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, there was this independent scholar named Barbara Tuchman, and she wrote a number of wonderful books on history, various
mhm,
aspects of history. She wrote one in particular on the outbreak of World War I, the things that happened and the chain of events that led to that. And in fact, just before the Cuban Missile Crisis hit, President Kennedy had just finished reading this book. And he
mhm,
credited it for giving him some insight into how to navigate this crisis without it turning into a full blown war. Anyway, she goes from the beginning of World War One, then she goes back and she writes another book on the 14th century. Then she comes back again and she writes another book on the early years of the United States after the Revolution. She just kind of followed her interest,
mhm.
and there's no way she would have been allowed to do that in a regular
Yeah,
university
yeah.
position. The other
Mhm,
thing is to
mhm,
understand that the skills that you learn in one area really can and should be applied across disciplines to other things. Uh,
mhm,
don't think
mhm,
just because you don't have a particular expertise in one field that you should stay away from it. I mean, just
mhm,
as a very mundane example, I made my living
mhm,
early on as a technical writer, and I got good at writing because that's what I had to do in academia. And when I got to the workplace in these technical companies, most of the engineers there could not write a clear sentence. So my skill contributes, and in return, I learned an awful lot about technology just from having to take
mhm,
their ideas and put them on paper. That knowledge then
mhm,
I could take and apply somewhere else and somewhere else. And
mhm.
you can just kind of leapfrog from place to place.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing too is that you don't have to be a world-class expert in order to make a meaningful contribution. One of the
Mm-hmm.
examples in my book is of a young eighth grader who became interested in an article that her father brought to her attention about a scholar who was claiming that during the period of Irish immigration to the United States, that there were in fact no signs or ads saying no Irish need apply, that this whole discrimination thing
Mm.
was really just a myth. Well, that kind of got her
Oh,
got
wow.
curious about that
Mm-hmm.
onto the internet, and she finds this old newspaper database, and she starts looking through it, and I started finding one example after another of no Irish need apply. So what she did, and this
Mm.
is where it gets, this is a perfect example of one way of doing this. She collected all these examples, and then she contacted a retired professor who was an expert in immigration and said, "Have I got something here?" And he says, "Absolutely,
Mm.
this is dynamite." And so he helped her
Right.
take all this research that she did and craft it into a paper that could be submitted for peer review. And it was, and she was published. And in fact, her paper basically upended this consensus that the whole no Irish need apply thing was a myth. She completely overturned that,
Mhm.
and, at age
Wow.
14. So,
Mhm.
it's that does not mean that she's an absolute expert on immigration, but she still made a significant contribution to the field.
And every voice
Yes,
matters, right? And that's why it's so
yes.
important to contribute in your own way and have that thirst
Mm-hmm.
for learning, because who knows what gold mine you're
That's
sitting
right.
on.
That's right. That's another thing, too, is that information is where you find it. You can
Mm-hmm.
find yourself with information that you just like, wow, this is amazing. Like,
Yeah.
I treasure my grandfather's diary that was eventually typed up by his wife in photocopy form to all of his descendants because it describes his coming to America and it describes his experiences as a young combat engineer in France with the American Army in World War One. That's amazing to me. This is real
Mm-hmm.
history stuff. This
Mm-hmm.
is the real thing. Um, And I don't know that anyone else is aware of this, but if they wanted to be, hey, I can tell you what Grandpa Harry did at the Second Battle of the Marne. So,
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. You're giving permission not just to
mm-hmm,
me right now, Dr. Sheldon, but to the listeners that pursue your curiosity, and who knows what gold mine you're going to be sitting on that's going to turn into something that future generations are going to really appreciate
mm-hmm.
and learn from. So how so this then takes me to the next question, which is such an important one, Dr. Sheldon. How do you sustain this deep curiosity in an age of distraction and
Oh
algorithmic
my
noise
God.
that's so prevalent? And I have these conversations with my
Mm-hmm,
son every day. He's
mm-hmm,
11. How I want him to really focus on pursuing his curiosity and start getting
mm-hmm,
hungry to learn. But it's the age of technology, right? It's social media. And as you said, information is everywhere. And so it also tends to be
mm-hmm.
distracting. So, how do you sustain that deep
Wow,
curiosity?
congratulations on cutting to the core issue. There are a couple of things that I do personally. Um,
Mhm.
One is to develop some regular habits that you stick to and that take you away from the screen. Probably there are some disciplines that I have cultivated over the years that have helped me to stay focused and to, um, stay on track. The first and probably the most important is keeping a daily notebook. So I have
Mhm.
uh, a series of notebooks that I've written in. I try to write every day at least 300 to 500 words in longhand. I don't type it.
Mhm.
I don't go near the screen to do this for a number of reasons. The first is that when you're writing something in longhand, kind of tedious, frankly, it's kind of a pain. So you have to
Mhm.
decide, is
Mhm.
what I'm writing down really worth writing down? And the other is,
Mm.
how can I express this idea in the fewest possible words? How can I do it succinctly? How can I
Right.
summarize it? And those skills are
Mhm.
priceless. Being able to take an idea and condense it down to its essence. That is crucial
Mhm.
no matter what your field is. The other nice thing about
Mhm.
the notebook is that after I fill a notebook, I set it aside for a while, start a new one, and then a few months later, I go back to that old notebook and I go through it and I reread it.
Mhm.
And I cringe sometimes
Mhm.
at what I've written. But every once in a
Mhm.
while, I'll see something that's like, hey, that was a really cool idea. And I will write that idea or that thought on a 3x5 card. And I have this stack of cards
Mhm.
that I have accumulated over the years from my journals and from other places too. Each one of those cards can form the seed for a new project, a paragraph, a presentation, um, a letter to someone, even a book. In fact,
Mhm.
there are a lot of intellectual careers that have been created just from exploring the implications of a single potent idea. So you're kind of an idea
Mm.
farmer, is what I like to think of it. You're
Mm.
taking this stuff and you're doing that.
Mhm.
The other thing is to read widely, but as much as possible,
Mhm.
read books. And you may think, well, the internet has everything, but it doesn't. It's going
It
to have
doesn't.
everything for,
Right. And the feel of touching a book
yeah,
when you're reading it, I think has a different way of translating it and retaining
that
information
is
in your brain. It's very
exactly right. And
different.
this is measurable. What has been found
Mhm.
is that in elementary schools, say kindergarten through sixth grade,
Mhm.
for those kids
Mhm.
who read out of regular books, dead tree books, versus learning to
Mhm.
read on a screen, the kids who learned to read
Mhm.
on a screen and did all the reading on a screen tend to be about 2/3 of a year behind the kids who used books. So books
Mm.
are really a more effective way of getting the information in here where it belongs. Um, so,
Mhm.
yeah, there are a lot of books out there that are never going to be on the internet because of copyright or because, you know,
Mhm.
they're they're not popular enough for people to, to take the trouble to get them on the internet. And
Mhm.
the other thing, frankly, that I kind of like is that when I'm reading a book, a hard copy book, Amazon isn't looking over my shoulder at what I'm reading. There's a certain privacy
Mhm.
aspect about it that I like. So if I want to read something that's a little
Mhm.
wild, I can do that and I don't have to worry about, it being
How the algorithm
yes.
is capturing what I'm
Yes.
reading.
Yes.
Yes, and I love you say that, Dr. Sheldon, because again, the more we try to explain to the current students and the current generation that yes, technology is part of your life, but the secret sauce is not
Mhm.
technology, it's still you. That's never going to go away. And so, from what you're saying, is it, and it's not a refreshing take, but it's a take that we've been told for a number of years that learning, curiosity, scholarship, education, it just isn't about achievement, but
Mhm. Yeah.
devotion. Devotion to truth, to wonder, and understanding, right? And sometimes I feel we as a human race are starting to lose that wonder and that curiosity. And so, thank you, Dr. Sheldon. That was such a good sort of reminder to all of us that you can't
Mhm.
look outside. You have to look within to bring that discipline and to bring that
Mhm.
devotion in. And we all have it. We just have to spend some time every
Yeah.
day to bring it out.
There's one other thing too that you need to do, and that is to find other people who are either
Yes.
who either enjoy hearing about what you do, even if they're not doing it themselves, or who are
Mm-hmm.
interested. And sometimes that means
Mm-hmm.
reaching out to people on the internet or finding people in your local community. One of the things I have discovered is that there are so many people out there who have done some really interesting stuff, and it's just kind of sitting there inside them with nothing to do, you know. And you also want to look for people who are doing things that are different from what you're doing. So my field is the ancient
Mm-hmm.
world, but one of my most fruitful colleagues in terms of long-term discussions is a guy who is a retired professor of civil engineering and collaborating on a really interesting project. Back in 2013, Pope Francis released an encyclical on global warming called Laudato Si. And we both love it. And we were interested because he was preparing to comment on some things that the EPA was planning to do. And he wanted to comment on these rule changes. And I was kind of looking over his shoulder, kind of learning what he was doing. And when this encyclical came out, we realized that there was some overlap here because the encyclical itself is really a fascinating document. Um, it has a lot of really good science in it, for one thing. And of course, it also has a lot of
Mm-hmm.
religious stuff in it, too. And we thought, hey, this is cool.
Mm-hmm.
This is something where we both have an overlap. So we ended up doing a series of seminars at a local Episcopal church where we talked about global warming in terms of this encyclical, where I would take the religious side, what Genesis has to say about creation and human responsibility. And then he would come in and talk about the scientific aspects of it. And it was very well attended. And frankly, it was a lot of fun. And I learned a huge amount about all sorts of things that I never would have learned if I hadn't been involved with this.
Beautiful. And that's why in your book you speak about
Mhm.
communal learning, right? The power of people coming
Yes.
together to think, question, and co
Hmm.
create ideas. But I think everyone gets a little bit into protecting their idea today, where they're
Hmm.
moving away from communal learning and wanting to be just their own name on any idea. And that I feel limits us as human beings to
Very
explore
much
more,
so.
right?
And that's an excellent point. There is this kind of isolation where we're forming ourselves into camps and tribes. The
Mhm.
problem with that is that if you don't have this kind of interaction with other viewpoints, you're eventually just going to wind up with something sterile and, frankly,
Mhm.
boring. You know? and
Mhm.
that's no fun, you know.
How do we reclaim the joy of learning, Dr.
Okay.
Sheldon?
Well, we have an advantage in as much as learning itself is, frankly, a lot of fun. I
Mm-hmm.
start the book by talking about how learning is just so pleasurable. Um, and
Mm-hmm.
if I could change one thing, it would be that we have this bias in our society that if you learn something,
Mm-hmm.
it's because you need it in order to make money at something.
Right,
You
because you need
need
to
to
monetize
monetize it. And
it.
this is especially true in academia now because college has gotten so expensive. You can't major
Mm-hmm.
in something that isn't going to give you a job that pays you a lot of money. So if you want to major in, you know, music history or something like that, and then you end up with 150, $200,000 in debt, well, that's just not going to happen. You're pretty much
Mm-hmm.
forced into these other fields. The other thing too is that
Mm-hmm.
universities over the last 40, 50 years been run more and more like a business, and that's just wrong. What is the purpose of a
Mm-hmm.
business?
And that's part of being a capitalist
Yeah,
world, right?
and we have to get away from this. The purpose of a business is to
Mm-hmm.
make, the purpose of a university
Mm-hmm.
is to graduate students. And
Mm-hmm.
that has,
It's to spread
and there used to
education.
be this wonderful old phrase that you'd hear applied to the university experience: preparation for life. not just a career, but you are
Mm.
developing who you are. You're coming into your own, you're developing a philosophy, deciding what kind of person you want to be and what kind of impact you want to have on the world. You hardly ever hear that.
Deeply, deeply
Yeah.
human, right,
Mhm.
Dr. Sheldon? I think we keep so focused on everything else outside of the human
Hmm.
experience.
And
And that really resonates with me because at Life Vision Lab, when I wanted to launch
hmm
this podcast, you get so pressured from the outside. What's your niche? How are you going to monetize it? You got to spend all this
hmm
money to do this. And what's the whole point of it? You're almost judged. You want to start something that is not going to monetize. And so for me, it was just, okay, I'm going to just create a foundation of
hmm
learning as a living ecosystem, not a
hmm
classroom, but a conversation, which is so aligned with what you've mentioned in
hmm
your book
Yeah.
as well.
Learning is already fun and it's already pleasurable and it's already a
Mhm.
source of joy.
Mhm.
We just have to remind people that this is true. And you've used the phrase give permission. And I think that's a wonderful way to put it. You have permission to
Mhm.
explore whatever you want. You
Mhm.
have to be serious. You have to be careful. You have to make sure that you're not fooling yourself or being led down some strange rabbit hole. But one
Mhm.
of the things that my book does is it gives you the tools to do those sorts of things. And a lot of it is
Mhm.
just ways of thinking, practice,
Mhm.
and building your own community, your own network. The other
Mhm.
thing is to understand that you can create some really amazing things in terms of learning structures and learning institutions if you want to. I was uh, involved, for instance, by a very strange chain of events. I ended up working with two other gentlemen to co found a university. There's a story in there about two undergraduate students who had too many books, and they ended up
Mhm.
creating their own public library in San Francisco. That's still going
Wow.
on. It's like 18 or
Wow.
19 years later, and it's still there. And it's completely
Right.
unique. And it fills a remarkably interesting niche that a lot of people who just wouldn't be served by regular public libraries. And the
Mhm.
other thing that I would emphasize is that the ability to go find out things, to dig up information, it it gives you a sense of confidence in yourself and in the
Mhm.
world, and
Mhm.
it strengthens you in a way that just learning something to get a job just doesn't. It's very difficult to articulate,
Mhm.
but when you've seen it in other people and when you've seen it in yourself, there's no mistaking it.
There's
Mm.
100%. Like when I went on this quest, and then I'm meeting people like you, Dr. Sheldon, and many others that I've lined up, the excitement on how much I'm going to learn is unparalleled to how am I going to monetize it. And don't get me wrong, I think we all have to have, like you said, you have to have the balance
hmm
between how you're going to make money, because food
Yep.
costs money, a roof over your head costs
hmm
money, right? But don't sacrifice learning and that hunger and that curiosity because of all of this. I think both
hmm
are very important aspects to a
Yeah.
human
The other
experience.
thing too is that, you can do a lot with very little time. You know,
Mhm.
if you can give yourself, I don't know, maybe an hour a day on a particular subject where you're really in there and you're really focused, um, in a year or two, you will know a few things. I go through
Mhm.
as part of the book, I explain like how many hours of study does it take to get an associate's degree in a particular field. And
Mhm.
it's not
Mhm.
all it's maybe a couple of years of an hour a day.
Mhm.
And really that's all you need. I mean, for a lot of stuff.
But I think it's the
Oh
distraction
yeah.
too, Dr.
Oh yeah.
Sheldon, right? The
Yeah.
scrolling and the trying to instill that
Yeah.
discipline every day to dedicate an
hmm
hour a day just to
Yeah,
learn
and
something and just to read,
it
just
is
to journal.
hard, and that's because These distractions have been crafted by people with a great deal of psychological expertise, and they are very good at what they
Mm.
do. I struggle with it constantly. It just drives me nuts, but I keep watching, so yeah, it's not easy. It really isn't easy. That's why it's also good to have you.
But I think it's in that
Hmm.
resilience by showing up
Yeah,
every day and doing
yeah.
it every day. So, Dr. Sheldon, for someone,
I was going to
sorry,
say
go ahead.
habits are more powerful than deadlines. You
Oh, that's such a good point. And so, Dr. Sheldon, for someone listening today who feels that
know.
spark, that hunger
Hmm.
to learn, and I'm hoping our conversation also ignites a spark in some
Hmm.
of our listeners, but doesn't know where to start, what would you say is the
Two
first step?
words: public library. Public
Mm,
library, and don't just, you know, go to the computer screen or whatever. Go to the reference librarian and talk to him or her
mhm,
and tell them what you're interested in and ask them what they know. Now, you may think that you know what's in a public library. You don't. Reference
mhm,
librarians are borderline magical. They know about stuff that most people would never even dream is there. And they can point you in some really
mhm,
fruitful directions, many of which don't involve the internet at all. That
mhm,
would be one way to start. The other way that I would start is if you're brand new to a subject, something that you really don't know much about,
mhm,
start with a kid's book
mhm,
and then go to
mm,
maybe a popularized book, but don't stay there.
mhm,
Move on from that as quickly as you can. Another strategy that you can
mhm,
do is to look at two or three encyclopedias and look up your subject in each one of those.
mhm,
And at the end of
mhm,
each entry in an encyclopedia, there's usually a list of references of books or whatever.
mhm,
So you look at each of the lists and you find out which book keeps showing up on all of those lists. Go find that book
mhm,
and start reading there,
mhm,
because that's the one that the experts say is the one you should know about. There are
mhm,
things like that, little tricks like that, that I have, all throughout the book for finding a way into a subject. And as always, write stuff down, keep notes, keep a record
mhm,
of your journey,
mhm,
because there's going to come a moment where you suddenly realize, hey, that thing that I wrote down a couple months ago, that was really important. What was that again?
mhm. It
Got to
helps
go
you go
find it.
back
Yeah.
and look at it.
So don't worry about it being perfect or neat or anything like that. In fact, if it helps, get one of those cheap composition books from the dollar store, because if you mess that up, you're only out a
Mhm,
buck 50 or whatever, buck and a half. And just start going, and then as you get more and more into it, start coming up with questions that you have. Find a question, find a problem
mhm,
to solve, and
mhm,
then start talking to people.
mhm,
I've been thinking on this and I've been really
mhm,
interested in this question here. What's going on with that? And maybe there's an
mhm,
answer that everyone agrees on and it's satisfactory, but maybe there isn't. Maybe there isn't a good answer for it.
mhm.
And you may answer that question, you may not, but the search itself can be very enriching, even if you don't win a Nobel Prize for it.
Mhm. And just learning to work through living in
Mm-hmm.
that mystery,
Yes.
right? It's such a
Mm-hmm.
beautiful feeling. And so when you say daily, so the first step you're suggesting, Dr. Sheldon, just so the listeners are very clear, is go to your
Mm-hmm.
public library, chase a question that you have in mind that you've probably
Mm-hmm.
put off saying, oh, I don't know enough about it. Someone's going to respond on it
Mm-hmm.
someday. Someone's going to find answers. How about it's you? And
Mm-hmm.
so take that question, start journaling about it. And I know a lot of us feel we have family life, we have work, we have so many competing priorities, but just an
Yeah.
hour a day, it's not a lot. And maybe we begin with 15
Mm-hmm.
minutes a day, 30 minutes a day, and then build your muscle and your habits to 1 hour a day. And those daily practices are eventually will get you so sucked into that quest of
Mm-hmm.
learning and that is going to be a big sort of step
Yeah.
forward for me as well and for the listeners here. So maybe being a guerrilla scholar isn't about
No,
titles. It's all about choosing to stay awake to
I
life's
would say that
questions.
is a
Would you agree
excellent
with?
definition. Yeah, it's not really about titles. And you know, here's another. If you're a parent and you're trying to get your kids interested in learning, there's no better way to do that than to get into learning yourself. If the kids see that it's important to
Mm,
you, they'll assume that it's important.
yeah.
And that was my
Yes.
experience. I had two parents who were both very much into
Mhm,
learning. My mom was very active in the local Friends of the Public Library, and it
mhm,
rubbed off. What can I say?
Amazing. And before we go into the closing of the episode, Dr. Sheldon, how can one stay credible without institutional validation? Because again,
Mm-hmm.
like you said, getting institutional validation is what's going to
Mm-hmm.
get you heard out there. So how does one stay credible as we step into this journey of learning and digging and exploring?
Excellent question. There are a couple of ways to go about this. The first is to start making contact with people who are in the field professionally and, you know, gradually
Mm,
make yourself known to them, check in with them, read their stuff, ask them questions about what they're doing, and gradually
mhm,
build up a relationship with these people. And
mhm,
they can they can in fact then vouch for you if you need to.
mhm,
In some cases,
mhm,
they might invite you to participate in a project that they're working on.
mhm,
Another way that you can
mhm,
do it is to do some research and write something up. And if you're lucky enough to write it really well and run it past some people who can make sure that it's good quality, if you manage to publish something in your chosen field in a peer reviewed journal, and that's hard to do, it's not easy to do. But
mhm,
once you've done that,
mhm,
you've pretty much established yourself as a serious player. The third
mhm,
way is to assemble a portfolio. So have a
mhm,
document that lists classes that you've taken, maybe at your local community college on a particular subject, or classes that you've completed online, or seminars that you've attended, uh, papers that you have either submitted for publication or even published, and just kind of build this up. And if someone
mhm,
says, well, why should I take you seriously? You can say, well, here's my body of work. And that will
mhm,
actually tell them a lot more than just a title. Quite frankly, the fact that I have a PhD has meant that I've been taken seriously in circumstances where I had absolutely no business being taken seriously. They just said, well, he must know what he's
mhm.
talking about, even though it was nothing to do with what I studied.
Well, thank you, Dr. Sheldon, for reminding us that thinking itself can be an act of freedom and that curiosity is the quiet revolution we can each begin today. So, we've learned that guerrilla scholarship is about independence, community, and the joy of lifelong learning. If this episode spoke to you, take a screenshot, tag Life Vision Lab on Instagram, and tell me what part resonated most. That helps me bring more of what you love to this space. And of course, pick Dr. Sheldon Greaves' book, The Guerrilla Scholar's Handbook. I'll link in the show notes below. Until next time, may you stay curious, stay open, and remember your mind is your greatest adventure. Thank you.